Chapter 20. Our agreement. When Benedict came the following morning to help him dress, if he was surprised to discover that his lord was naked beneath the silk robe, he did not let it show. Daniel assumed it was only a matter of time before rumors spread that the ducal sheets bore traces of whatever euphemism one used to soften a morning erection. He did not care. That intimate detail returned him, like a distant echo, to the man he had once been. "I'm still here," he told himself, with a blend of irony and relief. He would never regain the athletic prowess of old, but the limitations were beginning to ease now that he allowed himself to conceive of that possibility. If only Miss Whitcombe could work a miracle with his face. The thought hurt more than he had expected. It was not vanity, but an awareness of what the world saw before it ever saw him. "A reminder, if you permit me, Your Grace," Benedict said, brushing away invisible specks from the blue frock coat Daniel had not worn in years. "Next weekend I shall be away for the regiment's annual gathering." The news forced him to look inward. Twice he had cowardly retreated to his bed while Benedict attended that meeting, devouring meals and bottles of brandy alone. He did not yet have the courage to take part this year, but neither did he intend to surrender to self-pity. "Perhaps the valet Henry could attend to me in your absence," he suggested. "The men ask after you every year," Benedict replied. "Not yet," Daniel answered, unoffended by the veiled invitation. "Perhaps next time." "I'll speak with Henry," the valet said, with what seemed like the trace of a smile. For some time Edith had been convinced that the techniques learned in Copenhagen could truly help the wounded, but the Duke's progress astonished her. Only a few days earlier he had resisted even considering the exercises. That morning, by contrast, he greeted her with renewed energy, announcing that he was ready to move forward. "As you wish, Montford," she replied. "Let us begin with our feet apart, and remember to breathe correctly." He usually watched the demonstration. That day he imitated her at once. He trusts his body, Edith thought with cautious satisfaction. It was a good sign. They raised their arms slowly. When she bent to the side he hesitated. A grimace betrayed the discomfort, but he corrected his posture and lowered his arms with care. "Excellent," she said sincerely. "Would you like to try another?" "Yes." And then perhaps the entire sequence. It was far more than she had expected. Too soon, one part of her warned, though another part rejoiced. "If you believe you are ready, I agree." "I am," he confirmed, already in position. "And when I complete the sequence, perhaps we might move on to the massages." Daniel knew he had gone too far when he saw Miss Whitcombe turn pale. "I beg your pardon," he said. "You told me we must establish trust before proceeding." "I trust you, but perhaps you do not trust me." "It is myself I do not trust," she replied so softly he barely heard her. Those words pierced him with uncomfortable force. It is not the body she fears, he understood, and that realization compelled him to restrain himself. He was not prepared to see her cry. He had recovered the desire to live, and had allowed himself to be carried away by it, leading them both into forbidden ground. He chose to pretend he did not grasp the depth of her confession. "I am certain your skills at massage are just as sound," he said, with a formality that rang hollow even to his own ears. "Shall we try the sequence then?" The execution was acceptable, though the tension persisted. She guided him with professionalism, but she too was unsettled. The relief was evident when the hour ended, and she took her leave. Daniel knew then that he had broken the spontaneous trust that had formed between them. "Perhaps she is right not to trust me," he thought, without indulgence toward himself. He could not deny that he had proposed the massage, out of a desire to feel her hands. Perhaps she trusted only the monster who would aspire to nothing more. He silently cursed the rules that armored the classes. Why could two people not admit their mutual attraction? Because he was a duke and she was, in the eyes of the world, nobody. Perhaps she accepted that better than he did. "Forgive me, Your Grace," Fitzalan interrupted. "You have visitors. Say that I am not available." "The Baron of Thornbridge is insistent." Anger closed his throat. "Is Lady Agnes accompanying her father?" Fitzalan nodded. He could send them to the devil, but the Baron would soon spread word of his discourtesy, and it would be Agnes who paid the price of the rumors. Who could blame her for not wishing to marry a monster? "Show them in," he ordered, receiving them in his shirtsleeves. Two things struck him as they entered. Agnes could not bring herself to look at him, a sure sign that her father had compelled her, and the certainty so clear it hurt that he had never loved her. Would I truly have accepted a wife who stirred nothing in me? Miles Holloway, Baron of Thornbridge, shook his hand cordially, though he frowned at his attire. "Thank you for receiving us, Your Grace. We have heard that you have begun to go out again. Delighted by your recovery, we have come to speak of the arrangements." "Arrangements?" Daniel asked, even as he knew the answer. "It is a pity that the marriage was postponed, but now that you are recovered." 3 years have passed since Lady Agnes fainted, at the sight of the man she was meant to marry. And even today she cannot look at me. Agnes burst into tears. Daniel felt compassion for that superficial young woman, who in 3 years had found no other destiny. "You cannot expect your daughter to marry a man she does not love, and whose very sight she cannot bear."
"Love is beside the point," the Baron retorted.
"She knows her duty, and I expect you to honor our contract." Daniel held the Baron's gaze, keenly aware of the wound still bleeding in his pride. Too soon to yield. Too late to keep pretending. Chapter 21. Fog. On the way to Montford Hall, Edward told himself that Daniel's urgent summons must be connected to the pleasant evening at the Albion Club. Even so, something unsettled him. Perhaps his friend had not enjoyed himself as much as he had thought. That foreboding was confirmed when he entered the study and found Daniel with a tense expression, more somber than usual. "You look exhausted," Edward said, offering his hand. "You're not mistaken," Daniel replied, returning the handshake with little strength. "I want you to be my best man." The words fell like a stone. Daniel did not have the air of a man about to embrace marital bliss. Not like this, Edward thought, trying to reassemble the scene in his mind. "You're getting married? I'm very happy for you." Rage further distorted Daniel's wounded face. "I am not." Edward ran a hand through his hair. "I don't understand." "You're not getting married, or you're not happy about marrying Miss Whitcombe." Pain crossed Daniel's eyes like a sudden shadow. "I have already informed Miss Whitcombe that her services will no longer be required." Edward's legs went weak. "You dismissed her." "Don't worry. I included a generous compensation." The Baron of Thornbridge would not look kindly on a commoner doing gymnastics with his future son-in-law. "You're going to marry Agnes Holloway?" Edward asked in disbelief, feeling his head might burst if Daniel did not clarify matters at once. "I have no choice. Her father insists that I honor the contract." "And what does she say?" "Nothing." It is clear the idea horrifies her, but Thornbridge does not care about his daughter's feelings. Edward frowned. "I'm surprised. After your accident, Crowhurst did not hesitate to run to comfort her." "Percy." "Since then they've often been seen together. I thought they were a couple. It's strange they haven't married." Daniel struggled to order the whirlwind pressing against his chest. Agnes and Percy. That would explain why she remained unmarried. Not only was he condemned to a marriage without desire, but Percy's shadow seemed to stain everything as well. The thought of receiving another man's leftovers clouded his reason. "I feel as though a trap is closing around me," he confessed. "It is the price of having isolated myself for so long." "You should ask Agnes why her father is suddenly in such a hurry," Edward said. "It would be of no use." Polite society does not allow private conversations. And even if a miracle occurred, she fears me too much to defy her father. And Percy? Do you think he is behind this? It is no secret that he covets the dukedom, Daniel replied bitterly. He will obtain it when I die. You could live many years, especially if you continue improving with Miss Whitcomb's exercises. The name weighed on him like a reproach.
I have already dismissed her.
You could go on exercising without her. A void opened in his stomach. He could do it alone, yes, but it would not be the same. Not her voice, nor her presence, nor that contact that restored meaning to his body.
Has Percy ever struck you as a patient man? He asked suddenly.
Do you think he is plotting something against you? Daniel closed his eyes, seeking to dispel the fog. I do not know what to think. Do you want to marry Agnes? Of course not. Is there someone you would rather marry? The question disarmed him. He opened his eyes. If I say it aloud?
Yes.
You know it. But you disappoint me, Daniel, Edward snorted. If you do not follow your heart, your physical wounds will soon be the least of your problems. Are you suggesting that you would marry a common woman, despite the difference in class? Without hesitation, Edward replied. My father would be the only obstacle. The answer came too quickly, but Daniel did not probe. Will you attend the regiment's gathering? Of course, Edward answered, raising an eyebrow. Are you thinking of coming this year?
I need to leave the house.
The night at the club was better than I expected. They always ask after you. Benedict told me. Perhaps I shall go. Something you mentioned the other day has been circling in my mind.
That we were out of range of the cannons when they fired at Aquila?
Exactly.
It never stopped troubling me.
Perhaps speaking of that day with those who were there will be useful. It was not the most important thing that happened, but seeing what happened to you drove me to fight like a demon. Daniel scratched the back of his neck. I will go. But Benedict will be with the men of lower rank, so I hope you will stay by my side, in case I falter. You will not falter, Edward said, clapping him on the shoulder. And even so, I will be with you. Edith stared at the crisp new banknotes, tempted to tear them to shreds. They were necessary, her family needed them. The money was an insult, but refusing it would be a luxury she could not afford. The real blow lay in the note. She was grateful she had followed her intuition, and gone out to the kitchen garden to read it. Only the neat rows of vegetables bore witness to her tears. She would have to explain to her family that she had been dismissed. Montford did not call it that, she told herself, but the result is the same. He offered her an impeccable letter of recommendation, as though she would want one from the only man she had ever come to love. If only I understood the reason, she whispered among the cabbages. Perhaps if I had agreed to begin with the massage. The irony was cruel. She longed to use her knowledge to restore strength to his muscles, relief to his injured face. She did not believe he had sought nothing more than a carnal encounter. What other explanation was there for such an abrupt decision? A man's voice reached her from the house. Montague was arguing with her mother, asking to see her. There was no escape. Miss Whitcombe. Your lordship, she replied without turning around, so that he would not see her tears. Edward held out a handkerchief. Behind him she caught sight of her sisters and her mother, furious, standing in the doorway. Perfect. I come on Montford's behalf, Edward said gently. His smile faded at once. In fact, he wishes to revoke the note he sent you. Does he also want the money back? She retorted, holding up the crumpled banknotes. He wants you, not the money. If he wanted me to continue the treatments, he would not have dismissed me. Edward sighed. His life has suddenly become complicated. I believe he was trying to protect you. I feel nothing for the Duke, she lied, even as curiosity burned within her. I do not believe that, he said. And you will not be pleased to know that he is being forced to marry. Her legs gave way. Judith and Dorothy rushed to support her. When Edward left, after explaining the pressure the Baron of Thornbridge was exerting on Daniel, Edith was left trembling. A woman from the past was trying to force him into marriage. A woman incapable of looking at him, while she herself saw Daniel Ashcroft as one of the most attractive men she had ever known. You care, Judith said once they were alone. It's normal that you're angry.
Nonsense, her mother snapped.
You will have no further dealings with that womanizing aristocrat. Womanizing? Judith shot back. She broke off the engagement when he was injured.
She postponed it, Lady Agatha corrected. There is a difference.
Enough! Edith exclaimed, pressing her fingers to her temples.
You sound like fishwives.
She went upstairs before the argument could continue. In the shared bedroom she collapsed onto the bed, hugged the pillow, and cried until she was out of breath. It is ridiculous, she reproached herself afterward, to cry over a man to whom I have no claim. And yet she could not stop wondering why, all of a sudden, Agnes Holloway needed so desperately to marry Montford.
There is something behind it, she murmured.
But it is none of my concern. Chapter 22. Reunion. Edward's carriage was comfortable, and Daniel forced himself to maintain proper breathing for much of the journey, but the 4 hours to Brighton left him drained all the same. Benedict did all he could to attend to the two noblemen with whom he was travelling so unexpectedly. Pride at the honor bestowed upon him mingled with a nervous insecurity. Daniel watched him with distracted affection. Once I was the one who looked after others, he thought, with a stab of nostalgia he did not wish to name. By the time they arrived at headquarters, well into the afternoon, Daniel readily granted his valet permission to join the soldiers celebrating in the drill hall. We should find our lodgings, Edward, he said. I'm stiff sore.
Nonsense, his friend replied. Let's see who's arrived.
Daniel would much rather have eased the aches with Miss Whitcomb's exercise routine. The memory of her calm voice, her firm gentleness, slipped through his thoughts like a forbidden comfort. But Edward was impatient, almost boyish, eager to reunite with the officers he had fought alongside.
Very well, he murmured.
He had no desire whatsoever to face his former comrade's reaction upon seeing him for the first time since the accident. They found the officers' mess without difficulty. Yet the vivid memory of the last time he had crossed that threshold rooted Daniel to the stone floor. Before Waterloo he had entered upright, proud in his scarlet uniform, an officer of one of the most prestigious regiments in the British Army. From inside came coarse laughter, raised voices. Entire lives, he thought, lives that went on. I can't, he growled. Edward did not reply. He simply opened the door, placed a steady hand on Daniel's back and gently pushed him inside. Edward held his breath as silence fell abruptly, and every head turned toward them. He had trusted his comrades, but perhaps he had expected too much. Daniel gripped a handle of his cane with all his strength, his face deathly pale. This is how they see me now, he thought, and that certainty hurt more than his leg. Then the silence shattered into a deafening cheer. Sebastian and Richmond hoisted Daniel onto their shoulders, and paraded him through the room amid applause, whistles and shouts. When at last they set him down, both rendered him a military salute. In a heartbeat, every man snapped to attention. Colonel, Sebastian said, his voice breaking, it is an honor to see you again, sir. Fearing Daniel might lose his balance, Edward handed back the cane. Daniel took it and remained upright. Straight. Proud. A lump rose in Edward's throat. It had been far too long since he had seen him like that.
It's good to be back, Daniel said at last with a crooked smile.
I've missed you scoundrels. Laughter echoed off the walls. A glass appeared in Daniel's hand, another in Edward's.
A toast, Richmond proclaimed.
To our brave colonel. To Colonel Ashcroft. Daniel raised the glass, shared a silent glance with Edward. Thank you for not letting go, and downed the brandy in a single swallow. I am quite drunk, Daniel confessed hours later, collapsing onto the bunk in the assigned room. And I've eaten too much. A fit of hiccups carried off the next sentence. Edward, sprawled on the other bunk, was laughing uncontrollably. I am too. Daniel's laughter quickly faded when the walls decided to spin. You know, Edward, old friend, he slurred, I feel like an imposter. Why? They treated me like a hero, and I'm not. You should have understood by now that you are, Edward replied. Or something very close. Speaking of men, I should have called Benedict. Though by now he's probably completely drunk. Edward sat up and staggered forward. I'll be your valet, and you'll be mine. Lift your foot. Panic flashed through Daniel, he could barely undress on his own. Edward sat on his leg and tugged at the heel.
Let's pretend we're back at Eton.
The joke broke the tension gripping his chest. Daniel planted his other foot on Edward's backside and shoved. You always fall, he exclaimed, as his friend ended up headfirst on the floor. With a long-forgotten battle cry, Edward launched himself at him. For a moment they were young again, invulnerable. They rolled, laughed, tumbled from the bunk onto the floor. I usually sleep naked, Daniel panted, wishing the ceiling would stop spinning. But I doubt I can stay awake long enough to. Me too, naked, good night. My lords. My lords. Daniel opened one eye. Why was he on the floor? Can we put an end to this scandal, he growled. I agree, Edward murmured. They knocked again. Daniel recognized Benedict's voice amid the dull pounding in his head. It's your valet, Edward said. Tell him to go away. The sun isn't even up yet. Daniel propped himself up on one elbow, and saw that Edward was also sprawled on the floor. The memories of the night came rushing back. And despite the pain, he realized something with astonishment. For the first time since the accident, he felt like himself. Whole if not unscathed. Go away, Benedict, he ordered, his throat dry.
I must speak with you urgently.
He could bring us some water, Edward suggested.
Or something stronger. That seems sensible, Daniel agreed, holding back a wave of nausea.
Come in. Benedict's eyes widened at the sight of them, but he quickly cleared his throat and helped Daniel to his feet. Your Grace, something terrible happened last night. Have we run out of beer? Daniel joked.
No, sir.
It seems your accident was not an accident. A clean chill ran down Daniel's spine, clearing the fog. That suspicion had been lurking for far too long. Explain. A friend of mine, Sergeant Reginald, drank too much and talked. He saw what happened. A soldier deliberately fired the shot that killed your horse. He simply missed.
The shot was meant for Montford?
Edward asked, straightening.
Yes, my lord.
Once the hangover had passed, Daniel enjoyed the frank camaraderie for the rest of the weekend. He barely saw Percy Crowhurst beyond a correct handshake, and that was enough. Not now, he thought, not without proof. They decided not to mention the new revelations to the other officers, and instructed Benedict to investigate further if he had the chance. During the return journey, the valet reported, Reginald did not wish to repeat what he had said. He was ashamed of having kept silent at the time. After that, everything was chaos. So we know the same as before, Edward said. Except for one thing, Benedict added.
It does not take much to make him drunk.
A spark of hope flared in Daniel. Especially at a military gathering. Exactly, sir. He sang like a canary. Soldier Bennett confessed to him that he had received orders to shoot the colonel. He was devastated at having missed. He was an excellent marksman. Did the order come from a superior? Edward asked. That is what Reginald believes. Then we must find him, Edward said, and force him to talk. Benedict shook his head. Bennett died at Waterloo shortly afterward. According to Reginald, he was convinced they would pay for that mistake with their lives.
How did he die?
Daniel asked, trying to fit the pieces together. Impossible to know. At the time it was thought he was just another casualty. Cannon fodder. The silence that followed was necessary. Daniel reflected on all he had heard. None of his comrades had shown him any animosity. Only one name returned, insistent from the depths of his still open wound. Percy. But this time he promised himself he would not act on intuition alone. Chapter 23. Catharsis. Against all good sense, Edith had accepted the Duke's request to return to Montford Hall to continue the exercise program. She had been on the verge of throwing his note into the fire, but Judith had stopped her. "Do not run," she had said. "Decide," while looking him in the eye. She entered the study determined to feel nothing for the man who had dismissed her. That determination, however, shattered like a frightened bird the moment she saw him. Daniel Ashcroft, Montford, had carved a place in her heart without asking, and that irritated her with herself. "Good morning, Miss Whitcombe," he greeted her, as if nothing had happened. She noticed his clenched fists, a tension he could not hide. "Good morning, Your Grace," she replied, deliberately reclaiming the title. "Remember who you are," she told herself. "I do not blame you if you are upset," he continued. "Too much has happened. This is no excuse. Forgive me." Edith sensed that the Duke did not often apologize to those below his rank, and that gesture disarmed her more than she wanted to admit. "Do not be mistaken," she warned herself. "We can resume the exercises," she said professionally. "As I have already indicated, tension does not favor your recovery." The way he looked at her unsettled her, as if weighing whether to confide something too heavy to carry alone. "We will introduce the next exercise," she added. "You may reflect while we proceed." "Very well," he nodded, a shadow of a smile crossing his face. "If you only knew how much I need to talk," he thought, restraining himself. They began as before, feet apart, arms rising slowly, the body leaning from side to side. Daniel followed her movements with difficulty. "Too many excesses at the regimental gathering," he confessed, breathless after a single repetition. "And I slept in a bunk." Perhaps he expected a reprimand, but Edith rejoiced that he had left Montford Hall. "That matters," she thought. "I am glad to hear it," she exclaimed. "I'm sure you enjoyed yourself." And then her mouth moved ahead of her judgment. "A massage could relieve muscle tension. Be careful what you wish for." Daniel remembered his father's oft-repeated advice too late. He had fantasized about Miss Whitcombe's touch. Now that the possibility stood before him, fear paralyzed him. "Not like this, not now." Unfortunately," he stammered, "we don't have the space to." "We'll begin with the hands," she interrupted naturally. "You may sit in the chair. Does that suit you?" It was not exactly the part of the body he had imagined, but it was a beginning. "Yes, if you agree." "Focus on your breathing." Edith took one of his hands and pressed her thumb into his palm, tracing slow circles. Within seconds, Daniel discovered, with a mix of surprise and embarrassment, that his palm seemed connected to far more intimate regions. Traitor, he thought of his own body. "Relax," she whispered. Easy to say. Heat rushed through him as she moved to the fleshy mound beneath the thumb. He might have moaned, he was not sure. The back of the hand was less disturbing, until she stroked each finger from base to tip, with a delicacy that undid him. "Good," Edith said when a joint cracked. "Very good." "Very," he murmured, intoxicated. The euphoria dissolved when he felt her fingers on his cheeks. Instinct made him tense. "Trust me," she whispered. "Tilt your head." Pride wanted to resist, but the relief he had already felt persuaded him. He leaned back and fixed his gaze on the ceiling. With 2 fingers, Edith traced circles beneath his cheekbones, the tension released and tears sprang forth without warning. This was not part of the plan, he thought, surrendering. "Forgive me," Montford said, inhaling. "My tear duct seemed to be rebellious." "Crying is healthy," she replied gently. "It's cathartic." Saying it was easy, touching him had been something else. There was nothing explicitly sensual about hands, and yet, as she worked over his, desire had stirred in places she preferred not to name. Behave, she told herself. Perhaps it would have done me good to cry sooner, he admitted, his voice hoarse. But it isn't considered manly. Suppressing anger is harmful. I've been angry for years, he confessed. And tired, he added silently.
That's understandable.
After the gathering, we learned that an English marksman was ordered to kill me at Waterloo. Edith dropped to her knees beside him, struck by the revelation. Who would give such an order? Daniel took her hands and helped her to her feet. They ended up too close. The warmth of him contradicted the chill of the news. His discreet cologne enveloped her. Edith looked into the intense green of his good eye, and saw the torment he could not conceal.
I have my suspicions, he said.
And I believe they are connected to the recent visit of my former fiancé.
The Marquis told me about the Baron's daughter, Edith admitted.
Forgive my frankness, but she seems a fool for abandoning you.
I don't blame her, he replied.
Only now do I see how superficial Agnes was. I know it's impertinent. What do you think made her change her mind?
Her father, he said.
And perhaps a lover. That is unsettling. Daniel lifted Edith's hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles. Of one thing I am certain, Miss Whitcombe, you would not have abandoned me.
No, she said honestly.
But I am your therapist and you are a duke. We live in different worlds. You are right, he conceded, releasing her. Then, what is the next part of my treatment? Tomorrow we will repeat the exercises, she replied. Perhaps we will add a new one, and I will need you to be barefoot. Daniel smiled as he watched the door through which she had exited with graceful firmness. It had been a deliberate provocation, barefoot, waiting for her hands. The thought stirred him more than he cared to admit. Perhaps I should be ashamed for having cried before her. But Edith had been right, he felt better. She had understood, without him saying a word, that it was the first time he had allowed himself to cry since Waterloo. He had entrusted her with too much, even about Agnes, and yet he felt no regret. He chuckled quietly, imagining Miss Whitcombe scolding Agnes without restraint. She would do it, he thought, with unexpected tenderness. She called herself his therapist and cared for him with a sincerity he had hardly known, except from his mother long dead. But dealing with Agnes Holloway and her conceited father was his responsibility. And this time he decided he would not run. Chapter 24. Inquiries. Incredible! Judith exclaimed, when Edith confirmed the Duke's situation.
We have to do something.
I was trying to prove that the Marquis is innocent of those accusations, but I'd say the mystery of Montford's engagement deserves priority. Edith rolled her eyes. Her sister had the habit, not always ill-timed, of feeling like an investigator. And you have the habit of poking where it hurts, she thought, though without real conviction. These are not our matters. Of course they are. You care about your patient. Do you really want to see him forced into an unhappy marriage? That Agnes seems like the sort of woman who would abandon your care at the first inconvenience. Edith pressed her lips together. She would not allow them to take him away from her treatment, or from his dignity. If not her, then certainly her father. Something smells wrong. And the Duke's cousin seems involved. Judith brightened immediately.
We have to think about the English soldier, who was ordered to shoot him at Waterloo.
Crowhurst is the only one who would benefit from his death, right? He's the heir.
Yes.
He was at Waterloo. And he never wanted Daniel to continue my exercise program. Judith brought her fingers to her chin. We need to speak with Agnes Holloway. Find out what she really intends.
And how do you suggest we do that?
With charity, sister. It always works. Though we'll need Ravenscourt's help. Edith sighed. May God forgive me if this goes wrong. After lunch, Daniel decided to go to Brighton, to Edward's house. His friend always saw further than he did, and perhaps he could help defuse the Agnes problem. Besides, a free afternoon would allow him to think about investments with a clear head, something that had been in short supply lately. When his carriage arrived at the tree-lined avenue, he saw the back of Edward's coach driving away. Still, he ordered the driver to follow. He would leave a message. He declined the footman's help, descended with his cane, and knocked at the door. The butler recognized him immediately, despite not having seen him since the accident. Edward must have prepared him, Daniel thought, with a mix of gratitude and annoyance. "It is a pleasure to see you again, Your Grace," Hollis said, showing no surprise beyond a barely raised eyebrow. "Are you here to see the Marquess?"
"Yes, although I think he just left." "No, sir. 3 young ladies have borrowed his carriage." Daniel frowned as they led him to the study. Strange, yes, but Edward had always been generous. "Daniel," Edward said, indicating one of the armchairs, "I'm glad to see you. What brings you here?" "You mentioned investments in new industries. I wanted to know more." They spoke for an hour about spinning mills, canals, and factories. Daniel listened attentively, but his mind stubbornly returned to a woman with firm hands and a clear gaze. "I thank you, Edward. I lean toward the cotton factory in Bolton, although the canal seems like a safer bet. There's also Harrington, if you want to support a local business. Or a tannery near Guildford." Daniel nodded and after a brief pause got to the point. "I need a plan to counter Crowhurst and the Baron of Thornbridge." Edward hesitated. Daniel noticed immediately. "Am I missing something?" he thought. "The only solution I see," his friend said at last, shrugging, "is for you to marry another woman and have a child as soon as possible." It did not surprise him that Edith Whitcombe immediately came to mind. That, however, was a real surprise. The 3 Whitcombe sisters drove away from Montague's house in the Marquess's carriage, reasonably satisfied. Ravenscourt had been more helpful than expected. "Visiting the Holloway house will be another story," Edith warned. It was not. It turned out insultingly easy. Edith observed Agnes Holloway as she read the introduction letter. Her golden curls, overly styled, framed a hard face with a rigidity that held no sweetness. So this is her, Edith thought, feeling an unexpected pang of rejection, and a protective instinct toward Daniel. "And how do you know Ravenscourt?" Agnes asked, her voice shrill. "Through the hospital," Edith lied without hesitation. "He is a council member." Agnes nodded. "The Women's League?" "I am not familiar." "We are a small association," Dorothy explained. "Civil in nature. To support your cause I need to know exactly what you do." Edith glanced at the worn furniture. "They are not here to donate. They are here to show off. We help women fallen into misfortune." "In misfortune?" "Women and abused children, for example," Judith added. "A man is free to treat his wife as he sees fit," Agnes replied. "Some women need a lesson." Edith felt her chest harden. "I will never allow Daniel to be tied to someone like this. We also help single young women in delicate situations." Agnes shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "And why should I help such dissolute women?" "We mean respectable women," Dorothy corrected, "victims of unscrupulous men. Some destroy lives without looking back." I suppose you are right. You wouldn't want a child to pay for the sins of its father, would you?" Judith pressed. Agnes's face went pale. She brought her hand to her abdomen. That was enough for Edith. "So it's true." "You must leave now," Agnes said, standing. "I have an appointment." "Percival will give you a guinea as you leave." They accepted the donation, until the door closed behind them. "She didn't even offer us tea," Dorothy complained.
"And yet we gained a guinea," Edith said thoughtfully. "And something more important." "We should have used a false name," Judith muttered.
"If she tells Crowhurst."
Edith looked out the window, her heart racing. "Then we will be closer to the truth." And Daniel will be too. Chapter 25.
Let there be light.
You know, Benedict, Daniel said with a crooked smile. Until today, I never paid attention to my toes. They're not horrible, are they?
Not at all, Your Grace, the valet replied with his usual composure. Shall I bring you a blanket? No, Daniel answered.
He found it amusing to imagine Edith's expression seeing him barefoot, his feet resting on the ottoman. It's curious, he added, wiggling his toes. With all the bones that were broken, it's almost a miracle that they still respond. A miracle was that you survived, Benedict said soberly. I trust we will discover who orchestrated all of it. The words brought Daniel back to reality. It wasn't just bad luck, he thought, with a newfound calm. We're on it. And only thanks to you do we know the truth. Somehow, he paused, it comforts me to know that chance didn't decide my fate. I always wondered how it could happen, Benedict admitted.
We'll find out.
Now please accompany Miss Whitcombe. When Edith entered, with that measured walk that always seemed to carry a private resolve, Daniel felt the familiar tug in his chest. I shouldn't be this happy, he told himself in vain. Look, he announced, childishly pleased. They work. Good morning, Montford, she replied with a frank laugh that disarmed him. Excellent mobility. A clear sign of progress. As Edith sat in front of him and took one of his feet in her hands, Daniel remembered Edward's suggestion. Marry her and everything will be solved, he thought, a mix of hope and fear tightening his chest. But who would want to share a life with a broken man? Edith could have laughed at the improbability of the scene, an ordinary woman with a duke's bare foot resting in her lap. But the desire coursing through her was anything but amusing. How absurd, she thought, to find everything in him so intensely alive. Your valet takes good care of your nails, she remarked, realizing instantly that she had gone too far. Benedict has cared for me for years, Daniel replied. He was my assistant in the army. Without him I wouldn't have left the hospital, or the continent. Edith nodded, finally understanding the almost fierce loyalty of the man. There is so much about him I don't know, she thought, and yet I have never felt so close to anyone.
But she hadn't come just to work.
The truth pressed on her chest. If I can't protect his body, I will protect his life, she decided. Distracted, she pressed her thumbs into the sole of his foot. Daniel groaned, and rested his head against the chair back. Forgive me, she said, alarmed. I pressed too hard. No, he said, his voice deeper. Continue. Edith drew a deep breath, and forced herself to speak before losing her courage. Before we start the exercises, there's something you should know. Daniel lowered his gaze to her. He was relaxed, almost vulnerable. This will change everything, he thought. I believe Lady Agnes Holloway is pregnant. Daniel had lived in darkness for a long time. And suddenly the light came. The pieces fell into place with almost violent clarity. It was you and your sisters who borrowed Edward's carriage.
Yes, Edith admitted. It was us.
Don't stop the massage, he said softly. Did you speak with her?
Yes.
We used the Women's League as a pretext. Brave, Daniel said. And clever. Continue with the other foot. Edith exhaled the air she hadn't realized she'd been holding. I'm glad you're not angry. It was reckless and I'll speak with Edward, he conceded. But now I understand her urgency to marry me. Do you think her father knows? Daniel let out a dry laugh. They trust that I wouldn't say anything. Everyone would assume the child is mine. And the father? My cousin. No doubt. Your heir. Exactly. His eyes hardened. Diabolical, don't you think?
What will you do? What Edward suggested.
That is. Marry another woman, and produce a legitimate heir, as soon as possible. The involuntary pressure of Edith's fingers on his feet, her open and wounded gaze, made Daniel speak before thinking. Coward if you stay silent. Fool if you speak. Would you marry me, Miss Whitcombe? When she broke down crying and fled the room, Daniel understood too late the magnitude of his mistake. You mistook compassion for love, he told himself bitterly. Only a fool would have believed that a woman like Edith Whitcombe would wish to unite her life with that of a marked, lame, broken man. To her, he thought, I have been nothing more than a patient, and the testing ground of her science. Chapter 26. No escape. Edith did not pause at the doorway to explain her turmoil to Fitzalan. He was a considerate man, and looked at her with genuine concern, but she was not in a state to offer words. She sat upright inside the carriage during the journey home, determined not to let the coachman Anthony or the valet Henry know that her master had just broken her heart. Crying belongs to privacy, she told herself, clinging to a dignity that barely held. It was only when she crossed the threshold of the cottage, and the door closed behind her, that her resolve shattered. She collapsed onto the sofa and broke into sobs, as if her body, finally safe, demanded its right to fall apart.
And what has that wretched Duke done now?
Her mother demanded. Judith appeared immediately, offering a handkerchief and carefully untying the ribbons of Edith's hat.
I hadn't even realized I was still wearing it, Edith stammered.
I demand an explanation, Lady Agatha insisted. Let her breathe, mother, Judith intervened.
Why don't you make some tea?
The woman left the room grumbling, nearly colliding with Dorothy in the doorway.
What's wrong? The younger sister asked. Nothing, Edith replied out of breath.
How can I explain this rupture? I barely understand myself. For days, she had allowed the idea of becoming Montford's wife to germinate in her imagination, slow and dangerous. But the proposal had arrived stripped of love, offered with the cold logic of someone solving a problem. It was not the romantic dream, naive she knew, that she had secretly nurtured. The Duke did not see her as a woman to desire, but as a convenient solution. A respectable commoner willing to marry a wounded noble, a mother for his heir, a caretaker for his battered body. A resource, she thought bitterly. Perhaps it would have been less cruel not to receive any proposal at all. Still, she had to say something. The Duke has asked me to marry him, she whispered. No daughter of mine will ever stoop to be a duke's mistress. Lady Agatha thundered, reappearing, her brow on fire. The outburst frightened Letitia, who dropped the tray with the second-best set of porcelain. The clatter filled the room. The girl fell to her knees, repeating useless apologies through her sobs. Edith watched the scene, her sisters, the maid, her mother pressing a hand to her forehead with a strange clarity. It was so absurd it verged on obscene. She had to end it. He has not asked me to be his mistress, mother, she said, exhausted, her tears spent. Everyone looked at her. There was no escape. He has asked me to marry him. The silence was broken by a reverent sigh. Blessed saints. My daughter, Duchess. I cannot accept, Edith said. And why not? Her mother replied, incredulous. Because he does not love me, she confessed, hating how weak her voice sounded. Nonsense. Lady Agatha exclaimed. Love has nothing to do with marriage. You are being given the opportunity to save this family from ruin. Clearly you must marry him. For a moment, Edith thought of explaining everything. The former fiancé pregnant, the treacherous cousin, the terror of sharing her life with a man she loved without being loved in return. But her mother, unknowingly, had struck the heart of the conflict. Do you love him? Judith asked softly, sitting beside her. The storm in her mind quieted, and the tears came again. Yes. I love him. Then there is only one solution, Dorothy said, taking her hand. Before Edith could respond, a sharp, decisive knock echoed at the door. A shiver ran down her spine. It's him, she knew with relentless certainty. An ordinary person would have used the door knocker. This left no doubt. There was no escape. Daniel did not know for certain why he had followed her. It made no sense to do so on horseback, when she had returned in her carriage. Yet he had limped into the stables, and ordered the horse to be saddled. The astonished look on the groom's face would have been amusing, under other circumstances. Not now. If I don't go, I lose her, he thought. The ride was awkward and slow. Several times he had to stop to ask for directions, and he was struck by the deference of the people along the way. No one stepped aside. No one looked at him in horror. They see me, he realized, bewildered. And they do not reject me. That thought carried him farther than he expected. When he finally arrived at the cottage, unease pressed against his chest. He should have prepared her, he chastised himself. The plan had been logical, but it had taken her by surprise. And the truth, uncomfortable, dangerous, was that he desired her more than he had ever desired any woman, even before the war. She made him feel alive, and that terrified him. He remembered the eccentricities of Edith's mother, that she had mentioned. You are a duke, he told himself sternly. Don't be ridiculous. He straightened, controlled his breathing as he had been taught, and instead of using the door knocker, struck the door with his cane. A maid with red-rimmed eyes opened it. The omen was not good. Lady Agatha appeared shortly after, smiling and ruddy. The gesture tightened slightly at the sight of him, but she made a deep curtsy. Lady Agatha Whitcombe, he asked, offering his hand. Of the Edmund Whitcombes, she replied proudly. Enter, your grace. Daniel followed her into the sitting room, bewildered by the scene, rugs dishevelled, broken porcelain, Edith's sisters leaning over the mess. And then he saw her. Edith was crying. He had never seen her like this. The anger in her gaze disarmed him. I have failed, he thought, gathering the little courage he had left. Ignoring the pain, he knelt before her, leaning on his cane to keep from falling. Will you marry me, Miss Whitcombe? The sister's sighs stoked a fragile hope. Of course he wants to, Lady Agatha affirmed. Yes, Edith replied without looking at him, her fists clenched in her lap. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he had the impression that she had just accepted her own sentence. And as if fate wished to underline it, he realized he could not rise on his own. The humiliation was complete when Edith and her mother came to help him. But when Edith's eyes finally lifted to his and offered the slightest smile, Daniel clung to her, as though she were a lifeboat in the midst of a shipwreck. You have made me the happiest man in the world, he whispered. She responded only with a faint nod. Chapter 27. The tea. The next half hour was the longest, and most excruciating Edith had ever endured. The Duke, overcome by his mother's insistence, agreed to stay for tea, though his discomfort was evident in that tiny parlor where every detail seemed to conspire against his presence. An endless wait followed as they rescued the best porcelain cups from the cabinet, and washed them with an almost religious devotion, as if the family's fate depended on every unblemished plate. Lady Agatha filled the silence with stories of some Edmund relatives, who apparently actually existed. Edith listened, without hearing. She had never seen her mother travel south nor receive visitors from that branch of the family, yet she spoke of them with astonishing precision. Under other circumstances the mystery would have intrigued her. Now, there was no room for anything but the weight pressing on her chest. So this is being engaged, she thought with bitter clarity. Sitting next to the man I love, without knowing what place I hold in his life. When the tea finally arrived, it was lukewarm, the cookies were stale. Letitia moved forward with a tense expression, carrying the tray as though it held explosives. The cups clinked with a sound Edith found ominous. The maid apologized through tears. The good sugar bowl had disappeared. The second best had survived the morning mishap, with only a slight chip on the rim. Could they make do with that? She fled before Lady Agatha's gesture could turn into an open storm. There were no side tables at the Whitcombe house. For the women of the family, holding a full cup and eating a cookie was an ordinary act. For Montford, however, it was clearly a test. Edith watched him struggle with the porcelain, with the body that no longer obeyed him as it once had, and felt an unexpected pang of tenderness and fear. Is this what I will be for him? A compassionate spectator? Lady Agatha hurried to reassure him, assuring him that she fully understood his physical limitations complicated daily life, but that they would in no way diminish the joy of having him as a member of the family. Edith almost moaned inwardly. She had hoped, almost wished, that the Duke would withdraw his proposal, put an end to that uncomfortable charade. He did not. He bade them farewell politely, apologized for leaving in such a hurry, and explained he needed to attend to obtaining a special license. Not a word for me, Edith thought as she watched him leave. Not a single one. Daniel gripped the saddle pommel, grateful that the groom had provided him with a docile horse. He was so upset with himself that he could barely think about how to mount. He pressed his forehead against the saddle, closing his eyes. Your parents must be turning in their graves, he murmured. All that refined education, wasted. Lady Agatha of the Edmund Whitcombes will think you a clumsy fool. Another, more bitter possibility struck his stomach. Edith was not a fortune hunter, but marrying him would lift her family out of poverty. Your mother doesn't care about your flaws, he told himself harshly. Her daughter will be a duchess. Perhaps his father had been right, classes should not mix. He shivered at the thought of his mother's comment, in front of the Whitcombe porcelain. Not royal Worcester, she would say with disdain. Fearing the sisters would rush to help him if they saw him still in the yard, he filled his lungs and pushed himself into the saddle. The pain was sharp but bearable. As he rode away, he realized something that troubled him more than the limp. He had not spoken a single word to Edith since she had agreed to marry him. Nor had she to him. Magnificent, he growled. Simply magnificent. Frankly, my dear, reprimanded Lady Agatha, you'll have to do better once you're married. One expects wit from a duchess in conversation, and you didn't utter a single word during tea. Edith was about to reply that it had been impossible to get a word in during her mother's monologue, but she held back. It wouldn't make a difference, she thought. If I hadn't carried the conversation. Mother, please, Judith interjected. Enough. Perhaps you've noticed that my fiancé hasn't spoken to me either, Edith said, forcing calm into her voice. He went off to request a license, without asking when or where I might wish to be married. Now we must think about your wedding dress, exclaimed Lady Agatha, already on her feet. What do you have in your wardrobe that we can adjust? Edith felt immediate relief as her mother went upstairs. I suppose you spoke to him about Agnes, Judith said, sitting beside her. About how we believe she's pregnant. Yes. But I never imagined his solution would be to marry me. Perhaps he feels something for you, ventured Dorothy. He'll be a good husband. I know, Edith nodded. I just wish he had said even once what he feels. Daniel arrived at Montford Hall exhausted, but managed to dismount without help. At another time, he would have retreated to his room, to mourn the fragility of his body. Not now. He had matters to attend to, decisions to make. He needed to speak with Edward, to obtain the special license. He considered sending a message to Brighton or meeting him at the Albion Club, but he surprised himself by feeling, well, tired, yes, but alive. Miss Whitcombe had upended his world. She had pulled him from years of self-pity. Edith, he murmured, saying her name aloud for the first time, Edith Ashcroft, Duchess of Montford. It sounded right. Too right. A wife. A woman who stirred his blood. One he respected and admired. He hadn't told her that. And if she had agreed only for her family, then he had to protect himself, not show a feeling that might not be returned. Saddle Aries, he ordered the groom, who stared at him mouth agape. And from now on, no need to be surprised every time I request a horse. It's not the horses I should fear, he thought as he rode away, but men who smile like kin and think like killers. Chapter 28. A hesitant beginning. When Hollis told him that Edward was at the Albion Club, Daniel was grateful he had listened to the groom's warning that Aries had grown lazy. He doubted it was true, but the boy seemed to watch over him more carefully than he was willing to admit. Taking the carriage had been the right choice. He would never have managed to reach Richmond and return on his own, no matter how strong his will to try. The prospect of marriage had injected a new energy into his life, though he knew better than to demand too much of a battered body. "I must be in shape for the wedding night," he joked, redirecting the coach toward St. James's Crescent. He laughed, but the thought stuck like an uncomfortable spark. In shape, what does that even mean now? By the time he arrived, his clarity had returned. The therapist, Miss Whitcombe, knew his physical limits well. Encounters with Edith, Duchess of Montford, would be another matter. If he shed his clothes, she would see the scars. Perhaps it was wise to sleep in a shirt again. "Coward," he muttered as he stepped down from the carriage, annoyed at himself for anticipating rejection before he had even earned it. At the club, the butler received him deferentially and led him to the library. There he found Edward with Percy Crowhurst. A casual observer might have thought they were having a cordial yet spirited discussion. However, Edward's stiffness and the tension in his jaw said otherwise. Daniel suspected the espionage rumors were still circulating. He was tempted to offer his assistance in throttling Percy, alongside his friend. No doubt that cousin had been behind his mutilations. Instead, he decided to strike where it would hurt the most. If Percy planned to install his pregnant lover as Duchess and perhaps later get rid of him, Daniel would pull the ground from under his feet first. "Come now, gentlemen," he greeted, limping forward. "No long faces tonight. I have excellent news, I'm getting married." Edward raised his eyebrows, perplexed, with a cautious smile. Percy fell straight into the trap. "My congratulations, old chap," he said, shaking his hand. "My best wishes to you and Lady Agnes." "I'm afraid you've misunderstood," Daniel replied, with carefully measured calm. "I am marrying Miss Edith Whitcombe." "A commoner?" Edward exclaimed, openly smiling. Daniel breathed a quiet relief, hearing no reproach in his friend's voice. "I see," Percy managed to say. But the flash in his grey eyes revealed far more than his words concealed. The day after accepting the proposal, Edith asked Montford's valet to wait while she went inside to read the message he had brought on the Duke's behalf. "What does it say?" Judith asked. Dorothy peeked into the parlor. "Is it a love letter? A billet doux, as the French say?" "Unlikely," Edith replied, though even she knew a part of her still hoped for the impossible. "Well," Judith pressed, "it says that he will understand if this morning I prefer not to fulfill my duties," she read aloud, "and he signed it Montford. Very romantic." Judith didn't detect the irony and hugged her. "It will be fine. He wouldn't have asked you to marry him if he didn't care." "I suppose not," Edith said, resigning herself to the most comfortable version of the truth. "I'll learn to make do," she thought, as if that were a virtue. This afternoon he will go with his friend, the Marquess, to request a special license. He wants to know if I accept marrying next Friday, at Richmond Cathedral. "Richmond Cathedral?" Lady Agatha exclaimed from the kitchen. "Oh heavens! A patched-up dress will not do at all. Our cousins of the Edmund will think we are poor relations." "Because we are," Dorothy remarked plainly. Deep down, Edith was curious to meet these Whitcombes of the Edmund, if they really existed. But she knew she had to speak with the Duke before her mother succumbed to another episode of despair. She glanced out the window. The carriage still waited in the yard. She placed her cap and stepped out without delay. "I was not expecting you today, Miss Saxton," Daniel said, rising from the chair as Fitzalan ushered her into the study. He wondered, not without alarm, if his heart and body would always react with this intensity at the sight of her. "I imagine the ladies would have countless matters to attend to while preparing for a wedding." She narrowed her eyes and looked at him silently. That stillness unsettled him more than any reproach. "Would you mind answering a few questions, Montford?" she finally said. "Go ahead," he replied lightly, though her tone was tense. Were you serious about Richmond Cathedral? Guildford is an important pilgrimage site, and it's right nearby. The question caught him off guard.
I thought you would like it.
Traditionally, generations of Ashcrofts have pledged their vows there, and he nearly added that, after all, he was a duke, and ducal marriages were celebrated with pomp in the grandest churches. But Edith's clenched fists and firm jaw silenced him. My mother is on the verge of a fit, she explained after a deep breath, trying to live up to relatives I've never met. We don't have the means. I cannot marry in Richmond in a patched-up dress. They will say I am a poor commoner, who sold herself for money. She lifted her chin, wounded and proud. And another thing, are we really engaged? Because I call you Montford, and for you, I remain Miss Whitcombe. When she finished, her face was flushed. Daniel had never seen her lose control like that. He wanted to hold her, to assure her that everything would be fine, but he feared that any contact might be unbearable. He had been secluded too long to ignore what this outpouring implied. A grand wedding wasn't what he needed either. And regarding the names, she was right. It would be an honor to call you Edith, he said softly. And I beg you to call me Daniel, or simply Daniel. Daniel, she repeated quietly. The melancholy in her eyes gave him a cautious hope. Perhaps I am not indifferent to her, he thought. But a moment later she straightened, regaining her composure. It will not be appropriate, during my work as a therapist, she said.
Shall we begin the exercise routine, Montford?
Agreed, Miss Whitcombe. Repressed for too long, the Aquila inside him whispered boldly, then my therapist can also resume the foot massage we left unfinished. Chapter 29. Levels of difficulty. Edith had been naive to think she could continue the Duke's exercise regimen with composure. It took just a single allusion to his bare feet, for that illusion to vanish, betrayed by her own memory. She hoped he hadn't noticed how her nostrils flared, but the keen gleam in his healthy eye dispelled any hope. He did that on purpose, she thought, a mix of irritation and clarity rising within her. Daniel Montford knew exactly how to unbalance her. Would it always be like this from now on? Did that arrogant aristocrat think he could toy with her, just because she was betrothed? She decided to respond as best she knew how, with professionalism and defiance. She would introduce a difficult exercise, one that made clear she had no intention of yielding.
Let's start with the feet apart, she instructed.
Then we'll slowly lift one leg to the side. It did not surprise her that she immediately had his attention. The Duke raised an eyebrow while she herself struggled to maintain her balance.
That could be tricky, he admitted.
Edith's satisfaction evaporated when she heard herself say she would help him steady himself. Brilliant, she scolded herself. He smiled, as if he guessed she had walked right into his trap. We continue, she murmured, still wobbling on one leg. Return the leg to the center and bend the knee, always breathing correctly. Her determination was not enough. She waved her arms, humiliated at the certainty that she would end up sprawled on the carpet. The shame was avoided for just the right instant. Montford caught her before she fell. Safe in his strong arms, she was exactly where she had dreamed of being. His warmth spread through her body, and when she lifted her face, she met his gaze. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of desire in his healthy eye. She convinced herself it had been an illusion when he immediately stepped back, raised his hands and apologized. Evidently, he is not comfortable touching me. Or perhaps it is I who doesn't know where work ends and everything else begins, she thought, with a pang of disappointment. The sensation of holding Edith Whitcombe in his arms was so intense that Daniel almost drew her close, and erased all distance.
But she had made it clear she preferred to keep things professional, and he forced himself to let her go.
He stammered an apology he did not feel. God, how easy it would be to lose control, he thought, and that ease alarmed him more than his own desire. She seemed uncomfortable with their new arrangement, perhaps that was why she had nearly fallen. He did not know whether to console himself with that thought, or resign himself to a loveless marriage.
Now it's your turn, Montford. He was surprised she insisted on continuing, even though the exercise was clearly difficult, even for her. He didn't know what to make of the slight tremor in her voice when she asked him to turn around. I will support you, she said, placing her hands on his hips. The shiver that ran up the base of his spine rekindled a dangerous hope. Maybe not all is lost, he thought. Now raise your arms to balance. He inhaled deeply and obeyed. We start with the injured leg. Slowly to the side. His body resisted, as the wounded leg lifted from the floor. He wobbled, sweating, gritting his teeth against the pain. Lean on me, she said. The firm pressure of her hands on his hips was the only thing keeping him upright, and completely aroused. He took it as a good omen. This singular woman had the strength to help him through the challenges that awaited. Edith regretted having suggested such a demanding exercise. The effort made Montford tremble. She could feel it under her hands, see it in the damp curls at the nape of his neck. She leaned in a little more to support him, as he bent the knee of his lifted leg. I think once is enough, she said when he regained his balance. She should have withdrawn her hands, but she left them there just in case. And because her heart was beating so fiercely, she needed to anchor it to something, or someone. I think so too, he panted, placing his hands over hers. I appreciate that you want to help me, Edith. He intertwined his fingers with hers. It was the first truly intimate contact they had shared. Soon they would be husband and wife. It seemed hypocritical not to respond. You're welcome, Daniel, she said, savoring the closeness of his name. Without warning, he drew her arms around his waist. Edith held her breath as the heat of his back pressed against her chest. Her belly, as if with a will of its own, nestled against his hips. Her legs gave way, trusting his strength. She rested her head on his back, inhaled his clean masculine scent, and pretended, just for a moment, that he desired her for love. I don't want you to worry about the wedding expenses, he said softly. I'll take care of everything. She should have protested at this protective gesture, at his need to conceal that he was marrying a woman without fortune. But desire had her intoxicated, and the original reasons for her proposal dissolved like mist. Seeing that Edith didn't pull away, Daniel allowed himself to enjoy the pressure of her firm breasts against his back. All he had to do was turn, and his body would find the exact warmth he already sensed. But if she looked at his scarred face? No, he told himself, stiffening. Don't ruin this. It's nice, he said. Nice. Pathetic, he scolded himself. Aha, nice, she murmured. Perhaps he needed to hear more. I will be a good husband. Why can't you say that you desire her, that you choose her, that you love her? He reproached himself. I've never doubted it, she replied. Encouraged by the fact that she stayed pressed against him, he turned, wrapped his arms around her and let his body speak for him. Do you feel how much I desire you, Edith? He whispered in her ear. He searched her eyes for a sign, a spark to return his hope. He found only astonishment. Caught between despair and resentment, he clenched his jaw and opened his mouth to apologize. He lost his breath when she cupped his face in her hands, rose onto her tiptoes and whispered, with a determination that pierced him completely. Kiss me. Chapter 30. When fear subsides. Edith had never been kissed. She had never been held in a man's arms. She hadn't even imagined she could be worthy of a kiss. When Daniel's warm lips met hers, a persistent shiver blossomed between her thighs, and her body responded with an urgency that both surprised her, and that she did not try to resist. So this is desire, she thought, no longer afraid. She had done well to obey both heart and body. Her mother had drilled it into her endlessly. Men were driven by lust and ruled by impulses that had little to do with love. Edith desired Daniel Ashcroft, perhaps that was enough. After all, love was rarely the rule in marriages, and even less so among the upper classes. She had no experience with kissing, but Daniel's soft moan told her she wasn't going astray. When he parted her lips, she did not pull back. She had always faced challenges head-on. The brush of his tongue startled her only briefly,
Then she discovered that the gesture awakened exquisite, intimate, almost dizzying sensations. She let herself be carried away, and responded with the same curiosity, encouraged by the low, restrained sounds he could not fully suppress. Daniel's scent, deep masculine, enveloped her. She gave up breathing on her own and let him set the pace, savoring the faint trace of coffee left on his lips. She was barely aware that he lifted her. He did so with certainty, without hesitation. He is not broken, she thought, a certainty piercing her chest. She was grateful she wore a light skirt when, without thinking, she wrapped her legs around his hips as he carried her to the divan. A small gasp escaped her when Daniel sat down and positioned her across his knees. "My God," he murmured, breathless. "You're going to finish me." But he was smiling as he said it. Encouraged, Edith kissed him again. Daniel feared that if she kept moving, he would lose all dignity and control spectacularly. He placed a firm hand on her thigh. "Stay still, love," he whispered, more a plea than an order. She lifted her face, concerned. "Am I hurting you?" If only you knew, he thought. He very much doubted that a therapist's training included practical lessons in male anatomy. Edith's initial shyness had revealed her innocence. He had to go slowly. "Yes and no. I don't understand." He decided to be clear, even if frankness cost him. "Your rather close proximity is wreaking havoc on a very specific part of my body." "Oh," she said, frowning. "Then I weigh too much." She tried to rise from his lap. Daniel thanked heaven when she stopped halfway, tilted her head, and understood. "Oh," she murmured. "You mean that?" "Yes." Edith's open laugh was not, by any measure, the reaction he had expected. Seeing his bewildered expression, Edith feared she had offended him. The idea that a man might desire her had always seemed so remote, that his confession broke the last dam of her insecurities. "Do you truly want to marry me, Daniel?" she asked, emboldened by the love he had spoken. "I mean, setting aside the physical reactions caused by the movement of my bottom." It sounded absurd even to her. She was not surprised when he laughed as well. "Of course I want to marry you," he replied. "And you don't need to move to excite me. Being near you is enough. So, I'm attractive to you, and suitable as a wife, as a replacement for Agnes." Daniel's expression darkened. "You must think very little of me to believe that." She lowered her gaze to their entwined hands, ashamed of the tremor in her voice. "I'm sorry. Everything has happened so fast. I feel lost." "So do I, Edith," he admitted. "One look at me explains why I never thought I'd marry. You forced me to stop pitying myself, and gave me back a sense of wholeness I thought I'd lost. I trust you. Even without Agnes and her wretched scheme, sooner or later I would have asked you to be my Duchess. You make me happy." It should have been enough. And yet something still throbbed, uneasy. "When you say sooner or later, it sounds as though something was holding you back." Daniel sighed. "I'm the product of generations of ducal expectations. Class snobbery exists, very much so. Dukes marry noble women. Before I met you, that was my conviction. Now I don't care in the least that you have no aristocratic blood. You matter to me, we understand each other. What more could a man want in a wife?" Edith wanted to ask whether love belonged in that equation. But the word burned on her lips. Perhaps it was still too soon to risk her heart. Chapter 31. Preparations. During the following 2 weeks, as frantic as they were decisive, Daniel often returned, tenderly, in a way that disarmed him, to that intimate conversation with Edith. And to the kiss. God, that kiss! Just recalling it made his body respond with an impatience it made no effort to hide. Not that there was much time to linger on memories. He and Edward traveled to Richmond to request a special license. The priest hesitated, uncomfortable, as if granting it and authorizing the ceremony in the cathedral were more than he wished to assume. He insisted the archbishop must approve. The next day, they appeared before the Archbishop himself, who refused to perform the wedding without meeting the bride and her mother.
"The family does not belong to this parish," he ruled.
"Nor do I, Your Excellency," replied Daniel, patience already waning. "But you are a duke, Your Grace." Daniel rolled his eyes to the ceiling and silently heeded Edward's advice, "Do not argue. What's the use of a special license if you then have to navigate this parish ordeal?" he grumbled on the way back. "He's just showing ecclesiastical muscle," Edward said.
"Nothing more."
"I'm not worried, only irritated. Can't a duke show his muscle?" Edward laughed. "You're eager to marry. I never would have guessed you'd fall in love with the woman I suggested hiring as a therapist." "Do you think I'm in love with Edith?" Daniel asked, embarrassed that he couldn't admit it simply. "Of course you are. Look at you, walking, riding confidently, reorganizing both of your rooms, agreeing to hire more staff for the big event. You're possessed. You remind me of someone I knew." Daniel couldn't deny that Edith had pulled him out of a pit of stubborn loneliness. "I just hope one day she loves me as I love her," he thought, a hope he preferred not to voice. Edith's meeting with the Archbishop was a disaster, at least in Daniel's eyes. Lady Agatha drank in every word from the cleric, smiling even when he confessed he had never heard the surname Edmund Whitcombe. That complacency must have confirmed his suspicion that he was dealing with social aspirants. Edith, however, did not react to the barely veiled hints about the impropriety of commoners marrying aristocrats. Daniel admired her composure. He had to restrain himself from speaking, and even more so from imagining his fist against His Excellency's aquiline nose. The disapproval did not end there. Lady Rosamond Montague, Duchess of Kingsley and Edward's mother, also viewed the union skeptically. Yet for the sake of her son's friend, terribly marked, and because Edward would serve as witness, she sent her dressmaker to Montford Hall. Madame Sophie Delacroix, arriving from Richmond, proved to be a French whirlwind. Within hours, she claimed a suite for herself and her assistants, and began taking measurements of the Whitcombe women for dresses and a myriad of female items she deemed indispensable. Daniel's mind raced imagining what those indispensables might be. None of the Whitcombe women had ever had a dressmaker. Not even in the best of times could they afford a name like Madame Delacroix. Letitia was skilled with a needle, and though Edith detested embroidery and mending, she enjoyed the satisfaction of making her own clothes. The only indulgence in her youth had been the hats, stylish yet outrageously expensive after the success of Richardson's controversial novel. To Madame's delight, Montford Hall had a sewing room. Mrs. Fitzallen revealed its existence. Even Daniel did not know that his mother had reserved a room for her favorite pastime. Within a day, Madame filled it with costly fabrics and haberdashery never seen by Edith. 3 assistants, none of whom spoke English, measured, marked, cut and sewed under a rain of French reprimands if they strayed even slightly. The Whitcombes themselves were not spared if they questioned fabrics, colors or cuts. Edith feared the dressmaker might faint when they admitted they barely wore corsets. "Mon Dieu," she exclaimed, fanning herself with ostrich feathers. "A bride must have a tiny waist, no? And the bust," she searched for the word, "exuberant." Edith imagined, with horrified amusement, the Archbishop's reaction to such exuberance.
"She's right," approved Lady Agatha.
"My daughters have inherited the best of me.
There's nothing wrong with showing it."
The sisters avoided looking at each other, to suppress laughter. Perhaps once their mother's bust had been proportionate, now more than exuberant it overflowed. From that moment, Madame and Lady Agatha formed an unstoppable duo. Whatever the dressmaker dictated, Lady Agatha celebrated fervently. At first, Edith was irritated by the cost of the spectacle. She mentioned it to her fiancé during the morning exercise sessions. They both agreed to continue them. Daniel was progressing steadily and had more energy. He kept repeating that he felt like a new man, which confirmed Dr. Moller's theories for Edith. Daniel decided to postpone the massages until after the wedding. "It's more appropriate," he reasoned, For a man and woman to touch intimately only once they are husband and wife. She nodded, distracted more by the seductive sweetness of his voice than by the argument. He dismissed her concerns with a light tap on the nose, which instantly awakened in Edith a desire for another duel of tongues. As the trousseau took shape, she admitted selfishly her excitement. She had never worn such beautiful underwear. The white satin dress made her feel like a princess. Even the richly embroidered corset was comfortable, and enhanced her bust in a remarkable way. A shiver of anticipation ran down her spine at the thought of Daniel's reaction. He'll like it, she thought, recalling his murmured comments during the exercises and his obvious impatience to try it out. Concentrating became difficult, with that tingling in unmentionable places. Try what exactly? Judith and Dorothy were equally delighted with their bridesmaids' dresses. Lady Agatha of course declared that she looked so splendid, that guests would be stunned to learn she was the bride's mother. Madame was a tyrant, but perhaps rightly so. Edith enjoyed visiting Montford Hall. The Fitzalans welcomed her warmly. They seemed glad to see their lord emerging from the isolation he had imposed on himself. Still, she saw Daniel less than she wished. He and Edward spent long hours in the library with the tailor, who had dressed the Marquess for years. Edward always called discreetly, before peeking into the sewing room to greet them. It was easy to notice that his attention lingered, especially on Judith. Chapter 32. The house where the light returns. At first, Daniel refused when Edward suggested they wear their old military uniforms for the ceremony. He refused with the stubbornness of someone protecting a scar that still burned. I know you kept it, his friend insisted. Daniel recognized the trap immediately. Benedict had repaired the garment in the Netherlands with the devotion of a brother. So you've spoken with my valet, he thought, not truly angry. He confessed that he disobeyed your order to destroy it. He washed it and stored it in the attic. On the long journey back, there was no avoiding slipping into that reminder of brighter days. Wearing it now, at my wedding. The thought both unsettled and attracted him. It will impress Edith, said Edward. You were always especially striking in red. Those days are behind me, Daniel replied, though the desire to please Edith sneaked under his skin unruly. Besides, I'm no longer an officer. Neither am I. Still, General Ainsworth assured me there would be no objection. That was before I decided to marry, protested Daniel. And I'm surprised you even consider it. Edward smiled, practical as always. I'm thinking ahead. It's wise to be prepared. Daniel then understood that his reluctance about the uniform was another obstacle to overcome. My accident could have happened at any moment, he thought. Waterloo had only offered the perfect opportunity to his attacker. If he hadn't been surrounded by comrades, he might not have survived. He agreed to call the tailor for adjustments. And he was surprised by his reflection. The scarlet jacket and grey trousers returned something of who he had been. Not all is lost, he admitted with a new sobriety. The fittings with the tailor, deaf and discreet, gave them room to talk about Percy. You must stay alert, Edward warned. He'll try again when he learns you're getting married. I've informed Fitzalan and the staff. If he shows up uninvited, which often happens, he won't go unnoticed. Without proof it's hard to catch him, said Edward. His blood must have boiled seeing you safe. Perhaps the ceremony will draw him out. If he wants to stop it, time is running out. I can stay a few more days, Edward offered. As a precaution. Daniel appreciated the offer. He was reassured that there was no pity in it. I can defend myself, he thought, with a dignity he didn't need to flaunt. And I suppose, he added with a wry smile, that Miss Judith Whitcombe's daily presence has no influence at all. Edward's expression faded. You have no one to oppose your wedding to a common woman, he said finally. My father would never allow it. He would disinherit me and name my cousin Crispin Redgrave. Daniel could not hide his incredulity. That fool. The same. Daniel felt sympathy for his friend. If my father were alive, he'd do everything to stop me, he thought, yet he knew he would not give up Edith. For the Aquila, consequences be damned. Edgar Montague, however, was very much alive, and ready to hand a dukedom to an incompetent, rather than see his son happy with the woman he loved. It became routine for the Whitcombes to stop by Montford Hall for tea after daily engagements. Edith breathed a sigh of relief when formality gave way, fewer utensils, a lighter table, laughter daring to appear. She enjoyed being with Daniel, and began imagining a shared future, just the two of them, perhaps children, without allowing herself to name it aloud. Don't rush, she warned herself, though hope insisted. He showed infinite patience with Lady Agatha, always eager to take center stage. The day Edward announced he would stay for a while, Edith was not surprised. It makes sense that you and Daniel are closer now, said the Marquess.
Yes, Daniel replied curtly.
They exchanged a meaningful glance. Edith dismissed it as a man thing, that silent language inherited from school or the army. If there were anything more, he would tell me, she reassured herself. She didn't think it had anything to do with Judith, who lost her eloquence every time Edward spoke to her, nor with the way she looked at him when he conversed with others. Nor with the sweat beading the Marquess's upper lip, or his obvious discomfort in the armchair. Perhaps it was the soup, though in Edith's judgment it lacked spice. Through frequent exchanges of coded messages, it was clear that Daniel enjoyed the friend's confusion. Edith noticed that nuance, a barely there mischievous glint, and found it irresistibly attractive. This is you when you allow yourself to smile, she thought, feeling that despite the shadows something between them was advancing steadily. Chapter 33. Alarm. In 2 days you'll be the Duchess of Montford, Dorothy whispered, blowing out the candle in the room she shared with her sisters. I can hardly believe it, Judith said. Neither can I, Edith replied. Sometimes it feels like a dream, other times a nightmare. Dorothy snuggled closer to her. Nonsense. You're lucky, you're marrying the man you love. Edith nodded, and in doing so felt that intimate fissure she never confessed. She knew what she felt, she wasn't sure he felt the same. I know. I just wish he loved me too. He must value you greatly to decide to marry a woman of lower rank, Judith observed. Edward told me his father would never allow such a thing. Edith fell silent. She had sensed the tension between her sister and the Marquess, but she could hardly champion unequal marriages when even the Archbishop of Richmond murmured against hers with a duke. Disapproval knew no social boundaries. Daniel is marrying me to thwart Agnes and Percy's plot. From what I've seen, that isn't true, Dorothy countered. Daniel Ashcroft treats you with genuine affection. Edith would have seemed ungrateful had she asked for more than affection. However, Judith's next question diverted her thoughts. Do you think they're still conspiring? She asked. I mean Percy and Agnes. She must have realized by now that she can't pass the child off as Daniel's, Dorothy said. I'd wager her father will force Percy to make her respectable. When her sisters fell asleep, Edith remained awake. Percy Crowhurst was not a man who yielded to pleas or to a baron's wrath. He had ordered his own cousin killed on a crowded battlefield. He would stop at nothing for the dukedom. Daniel was still in danger, that was why Montague was at Montford Hall. The certainty clenched her stomach and kept her awake. She heard noises downstairs, in the kitchen. Since her husband's death, Lady Agatha suffered from insomnia, and often rose to make herself tea. Edith decided to join her. It might be their last private conversation before the wedding. She slipped out of bed, put on her nightdress, and went down the stairs without forcing silence. Do you mind if I join you? She asked. Not at all. I've made a whole pot, and I welcome the company. Edith poured herself a cup, added a spoonful of the expensive sugar, and sat at the worn table. Couldn't sleep. I know perfectly well why I'm here after midnight, her mother said, raising an impeccable eyebrow. And you? Nervous about the wedding? Not exactly. I'm afraid for Daniel. They had avoided giving her all the details, so as not to heighten her anxiety. Edith was gauging what to say when a noise outside made them fall silent. Lady Agatha glanced at the window and bit her lip. "It must be a rabbit," Edith said, though a shiver ran down her neck. No rabbit sent a lid crashing to the ground. Her sisters came running down. "We think there's a man outside," Dorothy whispered, clinging to Judith. "And it smells like burning." Grey smoke seeped into the kitchen. One breath was enough. "Straw burns. We have to get out now." "And if there's a man out there," her mother whimpered. Edith grabbed the handle of a cast-iron skillet from the hearth. She knew she was trembling, but she wouldn't let it show. "Then he'll have to deal with me," she said, moving toward the door. A persistent knock tore Daniel from a light sleep. "Your Grace?" "Fitzallen?" The butler would not wake him at such an hour without cause. Wrapping himself as best he could in his dressing gown, he opened the door. Edward, equally disheveled, was running down the corridor. Fitzallen braced himself against the doorframe, red-faced and breathless. "There's a fire, Your Grace." Daniel sniffed the air, incredulous at the idea that Percy would set fire to the very property he coveted. "Not here," Fitzallen added. "Down below." Edward leaned over the balustrade. "Mrs. Whitcombe?" Daniel's heart dropped. "Is my fiancé's mother here?" "She arrived in a cart with her maid." Edward was already heading down the stairs. "Hurry, Daniel. She's fainted." He normally descended with care, now he limped faster than was prudent. He recognized the tearful maid, and decided she would explain better than anyone. "Letitia, is it? Tell me what happened." "A fire, Your Grace. The cottage is destroyed." A knot of terror clenched his stomach. "The Whitcombes?" "Yes." The shouting woke us, the roof had already collapsed. "Miss Edith told me to bring her mother. Francis is with her, keeping watch over the arsonist." Daniel waited no longer. "A bath, clean clothes and hot tea," he ordered. "Load my pistols. Saddle the horses." 20 minutes later, the carriages were flying toward the cottage. As dawn broke, rage boiled in him. He had failed to protect the woman he loved. He prayed she was not hurt. He tightened his grip on the pistol's butt. One shot would be enough to end Percy. The blackened walls brought him up short. Where a tidy house had stood, there were only ruins. The moon gave the scene a spectral air. "Stay calm," Edward said, laying a hand on his shoulder. "She has to be alive," Daniel murmured, searching for signs. A man emerged from the smoke. "Francis Bell. The arsonist is over there. Under guard. Tied up like a trussed chicken." "Well done." But it was Miss Edith who knocked him down with a frying pan. Laughter rose in his throat. That was her. He chose the wrong person. "Are they safe?" "In the shed." Edith came out wrapped in a blanket. Soot-stained, hair in disarray, she had never seemed more beautiful to him. When she ran to embrace him, Daniel understood that he could no longer stay silent. "Thank God you're all right," he whispered. "I couldn't bear a life without you. I love you." She melted against his chest. "I love you too, Daniel Ashcroft." "Magnificent frying pan," Edward exclaimed, shepherding Judith and Dorothy along. "But it wasn't Percy." The disappointment hurt, though it did not surprise Daniel. "We'll take him before the magistrate," he said. "He'll talk." Chapter 34. Safe and sound. Safe inside the carriage, Daniel drew Edith onto his lap and wrapped his arms around her. She nestled against his chest, grateful for the strength that still held him upright and for the steady warmth of his body. She thought, with a sharp flicker of clarity, that this embrace was not only protection, it was a promise, and trusting it made her dizzy. She was glad Edward had settled her sisters in his own vehicle, leaving them that first moment alone as lovers, even though the unconscious culprit remained tied behind the berlin, a stubborn reminder of how fragile everything had been. "I didn't recognize him," she murmured. "When I saw him throw the torch onto the roof, I was so furious, I only thought of hitting him with the frying pan. Daniel smiled with a pride that needed no raised voice. Admiring her was an impulse he no longer tried to restrain. You are a brave woman, Edith Whitcombe.
But don't think about that now.
Rest. You're safe. His tone hardened just slightly. I won't stop until I find out who gave the order. An attempt on my life was serious enough. Endangering your family, that is diabolical. Do you think it was your cousin?
Yes.
And we'll prove it. Capturing the arsonist will help. He tucked the blanket more securely around her. Sleep. We're taking care of your mother. Fatigue overtook her all at once. Letitia was very brave, she said, yawning. She'd never driven Francis's cart before. Horses frighten her. It seems I'm surrounded by audacious women, he replied, brushing a lock of hair from her face. Edith smiled, though doubt still lived quietly inside her.
I hope I'm brave enough to be your Duchess.
It intimidates me. You are, Daniel said without hesitation. Intelligent, brave, beautiful. We'll face challenges, yes, but we'll overcome them together. Because we love each other. The rigidity still lodged within her melted away. She had feared those words might have been born of danger and fear. Hearing them again steadied her. It's wonderful to hear it again, she whispered, surrendering to sleep. While she slept, Daniel's mind found no rest. Thoughts and emotions collided without order. Gratitude, the terror of having nearly lost her, the unexpected certainty that he was no longer condemned to a life of solitude. They loved him, she loved him, despite his wounds, despite what had been left behind. Afraid of horses, he murmured, and an old suspicion stirred in his memory. He shook off the past. When they reached Montford Hall, he would make the prisoner talk. He knew, however, that brute force was neither his way nor something his body would allow. Edward, with his discreet methods learned at Whitehall, would be more effective. One thing at a time, he told himself.
A hot bath.
Then bed. Both ideas sparked an immediate and dangerous reaction. He closed his eyes seeking sleep, but the wedding, now illuminated by Edith's declared love, claimed his attention. The vows would no longer be empty formulas. When the carriages came to a halt, the courtyard blazed with torches. Daniel woke Edith gently, regretting that he could not lift her safely into his arms. Edward and the sisters descended first. Letitia hurried forward. Praise the Lord, the trousseau is safe, the maid said.
Nothing was lost.
The arsonist's groans accompanied his removal to the stable. The men handled him with contained fury. Daniel was glad he did not have to look at him. In that moment he feared he might not distinguish justice from vengeance. We've brought the bathtub to your room, Mrs. Fitzallen explained as they climbed the stairs. To your future room, she corrected with a smile. A bath sounds heavenly, Edith admitted. My sisters will appreciate it as well.
We'll take care of them.
Your mother is sleeping soundly, thank God. Edith raised an eyebrow. You must work miracles. A little brandy in the tea helps, the housekeeper replied, winking at her. The room set aside for the Duchess surprised her. Soft yellow walls, new furniture, the quiet care Daniel had put into it without saying a word. It touched her more than she wanted to admit. She thought of the distance between this luxury and the solitude she sensed. Thank you for taking care of him, she whispered to Mrs. Fitzallen.
He's always been a good boy.
Edith let herself be attended to for the bath, grateful, exhausted. Daniel waited until the maid had left. Then he entered, conscious of every step, of every boundary imposed by decorum and by his own body. I'm glad you're still awake, he said. Barely, she replied. I was hoping you'd come. She had rehearsed an excuse but let it fall away. He sat at the edge of the bed, upright. I've come to give you your goodnight kiss. Edith squeezed his hand, relieved. Thank you for the room. I think I'll be happy here. He sensed the shadow in her voice, and chose not to evade it. You'll like the desk, the wardrobe, the dressing table, but you won't be sleeping alone in this bed. Edith's slow, conspiratorial smile confirmed that he had not been mistaken in trusting her fire. Chapter 35. When the light is enough. All right, Edith said without thinking. After all, I'm already used to sleeping with my sisters. The moment the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't the whole truth. What she was used to, she thought, was closeness, not distance. The Duke let out a low laugh. What I meant to say. Edith interrupted herself, frustrated. Daniel, why do I lose the ability to think when you look at me like that? Like what? He asked, amused. As if you want to devour me. Heat rose to her cheeks. Perhaps. In that case, he said with a slow smile, that's exactly what I'll do as soon as we're married. I wish we already were, Edith confessed, unable to hide the impatience coursing through her. Daniel tilted his head, looking at her with an intensity that loosened her defenses. Believe me, you don't want it more than I do. But there's no need to wait until after the ceremony to give ourselves pleasure. The words shook her. This is what he wants, she thought, and I do too, even if it scares me. My mother says there's no pleasure in the marital bed, she said, instantly reproaching herself for speaking aloud. Then she's lying, he replied without hesitation, or she had a husband with no imagination. Edith didn't like where the conversation was heading. Pride came to her rescue. My parents loved each other deeply. And we don't have to compare ourselves to anyone, Daniel said, softening his tone. I can only promise you one thing, Joy. And if you'll let me, I'll teach you to find it with me. Edith knew she was fortunate. An experienced, attentive man, willing to guide her. And yet, an unreasonable part of her wished he had never known anyone else. She wanted to be unique even before she was, and that thought embarrassed her. It must have shown on her face. I was young and had fun, he admitted frankly. But I have never burned for a woman as I burn for you, Edith Whitcombe. Something inside her melted. She no longer had the strength to resist the kiss she had been waiting for since entering the room. She wrapped her arms around him, and the world shrank to touch, to shared rhythm, to closeness that required no words. When Daniel lay down beside her, Edith felt no fear, only a conscious, almost solemn surrender. This is choosing, she thought. Not yielding, but moving forward. Her breath caught when he touched her, when he knew her with a certainty that disarmed her. Edith broke the kiss to catch her breath, surprised by the clarity of desire. How do you know? She whispered. He smiled, as if the question were unnecessary. Because I listen to you. Even when you don't speak. The answer pierced her more powerfully than any caress. Yes, she said at last. Please. She accepted what he offered without feeling weak, but strangely powerful. Daniel immediately suspected that Edith's nightgown wasn't the work of the sophisticated Parisian dressmaker. Buttoned to the neck, in a discreet, unassuming ivory, it seemed more a practical choice of Mrs. Fitzallen. It wasn't what he had imagined for that first intimate moment, but Daniel had learned to wait. Patience too is a form of desire, he told himself. And yet, nothing about that simplicity could contain his response. He felt her beneath his hands, sensed her, and that alone was enough to ignite him. He decided to take his time. 2 more days. Only 2. Edith arched gently as he drew her close, uttering her name as if it were a plea. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, fighting the urge to go further. Not tonight, he reminded himself, not out of morality but by choice. When he finally guided her to the edge, he did so carefully, attentively, giving pleasure without claiming it all. He silenced her climax with a kiss, knowing the rest would come later when nothing could separate them. Looking at her, he was surprised to see her eyes shining. Not with fear, but with excitement. When she raised her hand to touch his scarred face, Daniel held his breath. I'm so lucky to have found you, Edith said. Something in his chest, hardened by years and war, finally gave way. Edith felt the urge to ask him to let her look, and open his injured eye. Not out of curiosity but tenderness. She wanted to tell him that nothing he hid could diminish his beauty.
But she understood, it wasn't yet the moment.
Love, she thought, also knows how to wait. She had heard of medical advances in Copenhagen, of promising surgeries, but she didn't dare feed hopes that might only bring pain. That night Daniel had given her something more valuable than pleasure, trust. "I could stay here all night," he whispered, "but—" "I know," she replied. "Appearances—"
"Not long now," Daniel said, brushing her lips with a chaste kiss.
Then Edith remembered. "You were going to tell me about the man who started the fire. Are you sure you want to know now? If not, I won't sleep." Daniel sighed, returning to reality. "His name is Patrick O'Neill. He's a sailor, works on the canal. He says an important gentleman threatened to leave him unemployed if he didn't do a special job. To get rid of me. He claims they told him the cottage was empty. And he only agreed after demanding a reward."
"What reward?"
"Free passage to America, and work on the Erie Canal." Edith frowned. "Could your cousin have arranged something like that?" "I doubt it."
"Does he know the name?"
"No. But the description fits Percy far too well." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with everything that still threatened them. Edith took Daniel's hand. "They won't take this from us," she thought. "Neither fear nor the past." Chapter 36. Where Love Rests. The next morning at Montford Hall, everyone, from the Duke down to the lowest kitchen boy, was busy with the countless details for the wedding plan for the following day. After the traumatic experience of the fire, Daniel was both surprised and pleased to see the 3 Whitcombe sisters gathered at the breakfast table. They were quieter than usual, but their demeanor remained calm, almost defiant, as if they refused to let loss dominate them. Edith apologized for her mother's absence.
"She's very upset."
"Mostly because she had to ride in a pony-drawn cart," Judith added.
"That trauma has pushed the fire into second place."
Edith and Dorothy frowned at their sister's sarcasm. Edward, unsure why, let out a genuine laugh, which faded as he realized no one else was laughing. Daniel silently thanked his friend for taking charge of Patrick O'Neill's matter. Edward brought the arsonist before the magistrates as soon as breakfast was finished, and assured Daniel that he would immediately begin proceedings to issue a warrant against Percy Crowhurst. Daniel listened, thinking that the weight of power rarely moved without expert hands. "The Marquess seems to know how to handle these kinds of matters," Judith remarked cautiously. "He does," Daniel agreed. "He has influential friends." "Like most aristocrats, I suppose," Dorothy replied, blushing the instant she realized what she had implied. "I mean—" "Don't worry," Daniel interjected with a half-smile. "It's true. Though Edward moves in circles even I can barely reach." He wondered if he had said more than he should. He would never betray Edward's trust, but it was clear that he and Judith cared for each other more than was prudent. "I hope she can choose her own path," Daniel thought. "I hope she doesn't have to pay for happiness with her heart." Throughout the day he saw little of Edith, beyond the morning exercise routine. She seemed worried, which was understandable. Tomorrow she would be married. Daniel felt the urge to wrap her in his arms and kiss her without restraint before she left, but he didn't want to provoke Madame Delacroix's ire, who had woken her assistants before dawn. "She's already made 2 of the poor girls cry," Edith explained, rushing off without even kissing him. Daniel was tempted to sulk, but he laughed at himself. "You're an adult man," he reminded himself, "and you have responsibilities." First on the list was writing to his steward about the cottage. He needed a detailed estimate of the reconstruction costs and the time required. Until then, the Whitcombe family was more than welcome at Montford Hall. He knew they would want to rebuild their home, and he intended to make it better. Not without secretly acknowledging a second purpose: it would be easier to persuade Lady Agatha to leave the ducal residence, if she had a respectable house to return to. The rest of the day, Edith was grateful not to have a single free moment. To think would have meant crying over the cottage, and the little treasures lost. Her mother's dramatics were already difficult enough to bear, though Lady Agatha managed to compose herself and rise when Madame Delacroix called her for the final adjustments to the mother of the bride dress. Between the trousseau and the preparations, Edith spent a lot of time with the Fitzalans, fine-tuning the details for the next day. The cook, Thomas, asked for her approval of the menu, and beamed when she assured him she wouldn't change a thing. That simple trust comforted her. She felt at ease with those loyal servants, and began to believe that perhaps she could indeed be a good duchess. The Fitzalans had served the duchy for years, and exercised discreet influence over the rest of the staff, most of whom were new. If they accept me, Edith thought, the others will follow. It was an immense relief that her family had a roof over their heads for as long as needed. Still, the idea of having Lady Agatha so close during the first months of marriage made her uneasy. She loved her mother but feared her imprudent tongue. Daniel had come a long way since they met, but the path was still fragile. A single ill-timed comment could make him retreat. When dinner was served, Edward had not returned, and fatigue was evident in everyone. Edith was convinced everything would go well, but the magnitude of the ceremony in one of England's oldest cathedrals made her nervous. She asked to retire early, but her mother insisted that the Whitcombe sisters gather in Edith's room for a little chat. Edith had hoped Daniel would come by to wish her good night. When Lady Agatha ordered Judith and Dorothy to appear in their nightgowns, and asked Fitzalan for a pitcher of wine and 4 glasses, she realized that her hopes for quiet kisses and words of comfort were evaporating without remedy. When the women left the dining room, Daniel rolled his eyes. He kept his thoughts about that little chat to himself. He had already expressed his opinion on Lady Agatha's ideas about the marital bed. Stay still, grit your teeth, and let your husband do his thing. He hoped that the previous night had convinced Edith that nothing would be like that with him. He retired to his study and poured himself a glass of brandy, aware that such a gesture had become increasingly rare since she had entered his life. He had confessed his youthful escapades, and assured her that he had never felt for any woman what he felt for her. What he had not admitted was that he had always loved lightly. He had been attentive, generous, even tender, but he had never given his heart. The night before he had given her a pleasure that was not his own, and in that he had found an unexpected satisfaction. Perhaps I can still be a good husband, he thought as Benedict helped him prepare for bed. There seems to be a party in the adjoining room, Your Grace, remarked the valet. My future wife and her family, Daniel replied, resigned to missing his good-night kiss. I imagined as much. Good night, Your Grace. Tomorrow will be a great day. Daniel was left alone, thinking of Edith, of the weight of the past, and of the strange hope that for the first time in years did not feel like a betrayal of his own wounds. Chapter 37. Pre-wedding anxiety. Still wrapped in the warm glow of a long, fragrant bath, Edith stood apart from her bedroom window, ignoring her mother's superstitious warnings. How could it bring bad luck to see Daniel and Edward ride off toward Richmond, she thought. She knew, because he had told her, that after Waterloo Daniel had needed 3 years to regain the courage to ride. She understood all too well how fear could rule a person. It had governed every gesture and every word of Lady Agatha Whitcombe for years. The sudden discovery of poverty had paralyzed the Whitcombe sisters, undermining their confidence, until charitable work with even more disadvantaged women restored their pulse of life. Daniel, Edith thought, was admirable. He had conquered his fear. It showed in the firmness with which he held himself in the saddle. Knowing the truth about his so-called accident had freed him. And as she watched him ride away, an intimate certainty pressed sweetly against her chest. It was not just courage, it was a new way of being in the world. He is really a handsome man, she murmured when they both disappeared down the road. Yes, her mother agreed. Despite the injuries. In fact, the slightly drooping eye gives him quite an attractive look. Edith turned slowly, making sure those words had indeed come from her mother's lips. That's the kindest thing you've said in a long time, she replied. It matters to me that Daniel pleases you. And why wouldn't he? Lady Agatha shrugged.
He's a duke. Now let's get you ready.
Edith shouldn't have been surprised, but before she could remind her that Madame Delacroix had made it clear she alone would dress the bride, the dressmaker burst into the room. Behind her came her 3 assistants, Edith's sisters Letitia and the maid Lucy. The air filled with voices, fabrics and orders. Suddenly Edith felt a light dizziness. All this bustle, all this anticipation, existed for a single reason: she was getting married that very day. Her life was about to change forever. The freedom she had so fiercely defended wasn't disappearing, it was transforming, and that thought made her shiver. "My God! I'm getting married," she murmured.
"Yes, we know, dear," her mother replied, practical as ever.
The Whitcombe sisters had always done each other's hair. Lucy, trained as a personal maid, could have helped, but Madame did not allow it. One of her assistants arranged Edith's hair into such an elaborate construction that it felt like a nest atop her head. Pulling the dress over it, without moving a single curl or pin, required the coordination of the 3 assistants under the severe gaze of the Frenchwoman. Edith suggested more than once leaving the hairstyle for last, but she was ignored with Olympian determination. After an hour and a half of adjustments, sighs and French curses, the 4 Whitcombe women were properly encased in delicate undergarments and sculpted by embroidered stays. Edith was dressed in a white satin gown, covered by a striped organza overskirt adorned with Brussels lace. The neckline was lower than she would have liked, but once again her protests were ignored. She had to admit, however, that Madame had chosen the pearl necklace perfectly. The white satin shoes were exquisite, the lace gloves immaculate. The dress left her arms bare except for the long gloves, so during the journey to Richmond they wrapped her in a white wool cloak trimmed with ermine. She and her mother rode in Daniel's carriage, Judith, Dorothy and Madame in Edward's. Forced to keep her head still, Edith saw little of the passing landscape and was too nervous to respond to her mother's constant chatter. Lady Agatha squeezed her hand upon spotting the cathedral, a reassuring gesture that failed to entirely dispel the sudden fear that Madame and the Archbishop might clash. The valet Henry beamed ear to ear as he helped her down from the carriage. "I wish you all the fortune in the world, miss," he said, winking at her. Those words dispelled Edith's absurd anxiety about the dressmaker and the priest. While she waited in the antechamber, Madame tending to the dresses and flowers, she felt ready. Daniel had accompanied her to the old church on the afternoon of her meeting with the prelate, but then it had been nearly empty. That day, however, it was packed, with numerous men in scarlet uniforms. When the famous organ announced her entrance, every head turned. Edith hesitated. She was certain many had come just to see the fortune-hunting girl who had captured a duke. She had agreed to break tradition and be escorted to the altar by her mother, but now she understood that too would spark whispers. The urge to flee hit her like a gust until she looked up. There he was. Daniel had turned to watch her advance. It was the first time she had seen him in uniform. Not long ago he had even refused to leave his residence. Now he stood tall, proud before the entire congregation, distinguished, noble. The wound was still there, but it no longer defined him. And upon seeing her, his eyes, the one that saw and the one that felt, lit with silent devotion. Edith's heart skipped a beat. "Everything will be all right," she whispered to herself as she moved toward her destiny along the time-worn tombstones. "I owe you eternal gratitude," Daniel murmured to Edward as he watched the procession approach. "I never would have met Edith if you hadn't insisted that I help her." "Then I didn't imagine the impact the Whitcombe women would have on our lives," his godfather replied. Daniel caught a hint of melancholy, and immediately another harsher truth slid into his mind. If it weren't for my injuries. The thought never fully formed. He didn't want to give it that power, not today. "Take care of my girl," Lady Agatha said, placing Edith's hand in his. "Now and always," Daniel promised. A soft clearing of the throat from the Archbishop drew everyone's attention. "Dearly beloved." Daniel barely listened to the preamble about the honorable institution of marriage, or the mystical union with the Church. The miracle was elsewhere, Edith by his side. Her scent brushed his senses, anchoring him to the present. Therefore, this union must not be taken lightly or recklessly. Certainly not, Daniel thought silently.
Nor to satisfy carnal desires.
He restrained himself from glancing sideways at Edward and sharing the irony. It has been instituted, first and foremost, for the procreation of children. And I intend to apply myself when we're alone, he thought, a private smile curling at the edges of his mind. Secondly, as a remedy against sin, and to avoid fornication. Daniel frowned, tempted to ask the Archbishop to avert his eyes from his wife's neckline. And thirdly, for the mutual companionship, help and comfort that spouses must provide each other, in both prosperity and adversity. All the tension melted from Daniel. Here was the heart of what he and Edith shared. Searching for her, he found her serene, steady smile, and knew she understood the same. They promised not perfection but presence. Therefore, concluded the Archbishop, if anyone has a legitimate reason why these two should not be joined, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. Chapter 38. Wedding Banquet. As the guests were escorted to the hall for the banquet, Edith and Daniel waited hand in hand in the antechamber of Montford's grand ballroom. A strange shyness gripped her, no one had ever called her timid. It's the weight of the irrevocable, she thought, a sweet shiver running through her. I didn't know your middle names until the Archbishop spoke them during the vows, she said.
Well, he replied with a low laugh.
I don't usually announce that my parents named me Daniel Rupert Hugh Ashcroft. I hope that doesn't make you love me any less. The need shining in his green eye, so alive yet so vulnerable, tightened her chest. He still fears losing what he's just gained, she realized. Of course not, she reassured him. As long as you don't call me Constance.
That was a surprise, I'll admit, he said.
One of Edmund's elusive Whitcombe names, I suppose.
Probably, she nodded, her smile softening.
I imagine there will be more surprises, as we get to know each other better. Not all of them pleasant.
We'll be fine, he said, with a conviction he offered to himself as much as to her.
In good times and bad. Remember that. Edith had been so nervous, she retained only fuzzy memories of much of the ceremony.
But this is sharp, she thought now.
This is choice. I already made my vows in the church, she added, but I promise you here and now, Daniel, that I will do everything in my power to make you happy. You already have, Constance. Daniel feigned a grimace of pain when she lightly tapped his arm. Already at it? Edward asked as he entered, escorting one of the Whitcombe sisters by the arm. They're waiting. A string quartet accompanied the bridal party into the crowded hall, though cheers and applause drowned out Handel's cheerful notes. Among the guests were some of Edith's father's cousins, whom she hadn't seen in years, several of Daniel's old comrades in arms, and a selection of notable figures carefully chosen by the estate manager and Edward's father, who had even invited Wellington, though he had declined with regret. Daniel had also drawn from a list of Montford's usual guests, a legacy from his parents. Edith's fears about high society's judgment faded. Even Edward's parents conducted themselves with impeccable courtesy, though they shot daggers at Judith every time she exchanged a knowing smile with their son. If Daniel had learned anything from his injuries, it was that in general, nobility could be superficial. Many of his father's old friends had offered their condolences, and then disappeared. They never visited the disfigured son. Perhaps it would have been different with a medal, he thought, not bitterly, just wearily. Now, however, he saw applause and smiles as he led his wife into the hall. The warm reception was a relief, especially for Edith. Let them welcome her, he thought. Let them not make her pay for me. Even Edward's obliging parents clapped. He wondered how many among the crowd would be surprised that a man like him had won the heart of a woman like her. Edith would have scolded him for such thoughts. She saw the best in him with a naturalness that disarmed him. I hope she can see me like that when we're alone, he thought, when no one remains but our bare truth. The procession advanced toward their seats, when Lady Agatha stopped them at a table. Your Grace, she said, pointing to a thin, rustic-looking couple who rose, Allow me to introduce my cousins Lawrence and Constance Whitcombe of Edmund. Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Whitcombe, Daniel replied, striving to maintain composure at Edith's astonished expression while shaking the man's bony hand. Oh, there's been a mistake, Your Grace, Lawrence said. Constance and I, we are siblings. You've travelled far to be here, Daniel remarked.
Not so far, Constance replied with a marked Surrey accent, rising after a deep bow.
We've lived in Dorking for 20 years. In any case, it was very kind of you to come, Edith said, kissing her on both cheeks. Mother has spoken of you often. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, Lawrence replied. It's not every day a Whitcombe marries a duke. That's true, Daniel admitted, admiring his wife's skill in stifling the laugh that threatened to escape. Judith and Dorothy were introduced next to Edmund's lively relatives, and finally the newlyweds took their places at the head table.
Not what you expected, Daniel whispered into Edith's ear.
She rolled her eyes. From the way Mother spoke, I imagined pompous relatives in some old manor. The quartet played throughout the meal. Lady Agatha had insisted on a dance after dessert, but to Daniel's relief, Edward and Edith dismissed the idea. Some guests formed a square anyway, though lacking proper space, their enthusiasm quickly waned after a couple of awkward minuets. I hope you're not disappointed, Daniel murmured, squeezing her hand beneath the table, about the dancing.
No, she reassured him.
I'm looking forward to it being you who asks me to dance tonight. The promise, spoken softly, ran through him like a spark. Patience, he told himself, doing the only sensible thing, staying still. Edith lowered her gaze, blushing, but did not withdraw her fingers. And in that silent gesture, they both understood that desire could wait, for now time belonged to them. Chapter 39. Preliminaries.
Let's hope his speech is brief, Daniel murmured into Edith's ear as Edward rose.
She nodded, surprised to find herself hoping the same. It shouldn't be like this, she thought, a mix of irony and anticipation stirring within her. Brides were supposed to fear the first night, she, however, awaited it with a restless impatience that puzzled her. Before Daniel, sexuality had been an abstract concept, almost academic, despite having lived among strong, well-trained bodies at the Danish school. Now it accompanied her like a constant, intimate, inescapable pulse. Edward's speech was not brief, yet it captivated the room. When he hinted that Daniel's accident had not been an accident, a murmur swept through the hall. Mouths opened, indignation ignited quickly. Shame, shame, guests began whispering. The atmosphere grew more charged when Edward mentioned the cottage fire. He gave no names, but Edith understood the intention. He's planting the seed, she realized with clarity. He's swaying public opinion in our favor, she whispered to Daniel. And my vile cousin is conspicuously absent, he replied quietly.
That doesn't reassure me.
Do you think he's fled? If he's heard about his man's arrest, yes. Edward raised his glass. Finally, I ask you to toast to the health and happiness of two of the finest people I know. Daniel and Edith Ashcroft, Duke and Duchess of Montford. The entire hall rose. Edith swallowed, finally accepting the reality she had spoken in her vows, now surrounding her completely. I am a duchess, she thought, equal parts dizzy and determined. When the guests sat again, Daniel stood. Thank you for joining us and for your kind wishes. Now, if you'll excuse us, my wife and I have an urgent engagement. Whistles, laughter and applause escorted them up the stairs. I don't know why I'm so nervous, Daniel confessed as he shrugged off his uniform jacket and draped it over a chair.
It's not the first time well, that's not it.
I suppose it's because you're the first since. He stopped when he saw her smile. Why are you looking at me like that? I should be the nervous one, Edith replied.
And I'm not.
Perhaps because I'm used to Benedict helping me undress, he said, searching for an explanation he knew was incomplete. The truth was deeper, he had never loved like this nor felt so much at stake. I don't think it's about the lack of a valet, she answered gently, nudging him to sit on the bed. Daniel held his breath as she leaned to remove his boots.
The closeness, the touch, the ease of her movements disarmed him. This must be what trust feels like, he thought, vulnerable and alive at once. Edith moved between his legs and began unbuttoning his shirt. As you see, the problem solves itself easily. You're very efficient, he said, aware that desire was stealing his eloquence. I'm impatient, she admitted, freeing him from his shirt with confident hands. When Daniel stood, doubt returned. Being undressed by her excited him, but it also exposed him. Some scars were already visible. Oh, Daniel, Edith murmured, tracing one of the white marks crossing his chest with her finger. They had to open me, he said with learned calm. Her touch, respectful and attentive, drew from him a moan he hadn't expected. She's not fleeing, he thought in wonder. She doesn't look away. Daniel spoke of his scars with composure, but Edith knew enough about surgery to imagine the pain, the rawness of a field hospital. He survived where others did not, she thought, with an almost fierce tenderness. In a way I was lucky, he went on. I collapsed early. In the end, the surgeons could no longer decide anything. Many simply didn't survive. You were healed for me, she said without hesitation. I was saved, he corrected, but I'm not the man I was. She did not contradict him. There would be time to heal words. Now she chose to show him, not persuade him. Her closeness was a silent promise. Perhaps now you are a better man, she said. No one passes through hell unscathed, but they do come out stronger. Daniel cupped her face. It was you who gave me back a future. The love in his eyes fed Edith's desire, and she no longer felt guilt or fear. This is also who I am, she accepted. And you have awakened me, she confessed. I want to know you whole. Then be prepared, he replied with a trace of irony. Not everything is beautiful. She stilled her hands. I love all of you, Daniel. What you are and what you fear you might be. When I look at you, I see a good, generous man, and beautiful to me. And desirable, he asked, teasing, needing the answer. You are the only one who has lit this fire in me. Their surrender was slow, deliberate, unhurried. When Edith lifted her gaze to him, there was no naive curiosity, only resolve. I will not turn away, she promised herself. May I, she asked, seeking permission even in intimacy. I thought you'd never ask, Daniel replied, taking her hand. And in that gesture, more than in any other, they both understood that this was not only about the body, but about the mutual choice never to hide again.